This is Uncle Tech Sport, and today we are taking a look at this. This is the MSI RTX 4070 Super Ventus 2X. So this is an MSRP model. It should be MSRP anyway. Its build quality it's okay, but it's clearly built to save money. For instance, the backplate, that's plastic. It is a very nice backplate. I do like the simplicity of it. It has a brushed look, and there's no weird colors or patterns or anything like that on the backplate. It's very plain, and I like that. There's also the standard cutouts on the back here for airflow. How much that helps, I don't know, but it's there. I don't know if you can see it, but the PCB is only about this. Goes down to here, and the rest is a heatsink. So it's a very small PCB as well. And the card itself is actually also pretty small. It's less than 25 centimeters long, so this direction. And it's only dual slot, strictly dual slot. So it seems to be quite well suited for small form factor builds and such. And as we will take a look at later on, the power consumption is not really that bad either. It has the 12 volt high power connector or whatever it's called, and there's an adapter in the box. The adapter uses two 8-pin power connectors. So yeah, unless you haven't used PSU with that connector, then there is an adapter in the box, so you should be able to use that. Dual fans, pretty large fans, and the heatsink is not that large. The entire card weighs less than 700 grams. Which is like half the weight of the 7800 XT Phantom Gaming that we looked at last week. So yeah, a quite small card. Seems to be a good fit for small form factor builds. But the cooling is, it's okay. It's acceptable, but it's not great. Fan speeds went up to 2100 RPM. And at that point, I think I measured noise at 49 dBA, which is quite a bit louder than the Phantom Gaming 7800 XT from last week, but then the fan speeds are over close to 1000 RPMs higher, so that makes a difference. But it's not unacceptably loud. It's not like a blower fan or something like that. It's relatively quiet, given that it's running at such high RPMs. But yeah, so the noise level is acceptable, but it's not great. And I am impressed what they have been able to achieve given the small size of the card and the cooler, so there is that. Temperatures were also well within safe limits. The core temperature, that was about 75 degrees Celsius, and the memory junction temperature, that was 74 degrees Celsius. So temperatures were well under control. It's not overheating or anything like that, but temp, that was 86.5 degrees Celsius, so it's about a 10-degree difference from the edge temp or the GPU temp to the hotspot temp, and that's very acceptable. A lot better than the 7800 XT that we looked at last week. So it get a pass for cooling, but if you want the card to be more silent, you should look into undervolting the card. I did try to undervolt it and set a custom fan curve that topped out about 1700 RPMs. Then you are down to 44 dBA, so quite a bit less noise. And temperatures were also okay. I mean, 76 degrees Celsius. It's not great, but it's perfectly safe. There's nothing wrong with 76 degrees Celsius. It's not gonna melt at that temperature, so yeah, it was okay. So if you want lower noise, you got two choices: buy a different card or undervolt. Those are your options. I would like to test the Founders Edition, but they're hard to come by over here, so I can't really do that. But I can imagine that the Founders Edition is quite a bit better build quality than this card, and it's probably also a bit quieter, maybe, based on what I've seen online. We start off with Like a Dragon, the man who erased his name. This game uses the Dragon engine, and here at 1440p, the 4070 Super did 106.8 frames per second on average. That made it 2% faster than the 7800 XT and 64% faster than the RTX 3070. At 1440p ultra-wide, we're coming in at 84.7 frames per second on average, 3% ahead of the 7800 XT and 54% faster than the RTX 3070. At 4K, it's 55% faster than the 3070 and about on par with the 7800 XT. LISO P This game uses Unreal Engine 4, and it's a really agnostic Unreal Engine 4 game, so it doesn't really care if you're using an NVIDIA or an AMD GPU compared to other titles like the next one. 4040p, 200.1 frames per second average, 8% faster than the 7800 XT, and 48% ahead of the 3070. At 4040p ultra-wide, we did 157.4 frames per second on average. That made it 5% faster than the 7800 XT and 36% faster than the 3070. At 4K, we did 97.3 frames per second average, and that made it 2% slower than the 7800 XT, but 43% faster than the 3070. Payday 3, another Unreal Engine 4 game, and this game does favor NVIDIA GPUs. Here the 4070 Super did 144.3 frames per second average at 4040p, and that made it 17% ahead of the 7800 XT. It was also 28% ahead of the 3070, so the gap between the 7800 XT is larger than usual, and the gap between the 3070 is smaller than usual. 4040p ultra-wide, 110.8 frames per second average, 23% faster than the 7800 XT, and 28% ahead of the 3070. At 4K, we're down to 61.1 frames per second average, still 8% ahead of the 7800 XT, and 19% ahead of the RTX 3070. Next up is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This game uses the Anvil engine, and here at 4040p we did 121.7 frames per second average, and that was 2% ahead of the 7800 XT and 32% ahead of the RTX 3070. At 4040p ultra-wide we did 98.3 frames per second average, that was on par with the 7800 XT and 31% ahead of the 3070. At 4K we're coming in at 72.6 frames per second average, a single percent behind the 7800 XT, but 32% faster than the 3070. Starfield, this game uses the Creation Engine 2, and here at 4040p we are coming in at 101.4 frames per second on average, and I believe that makes the 7800 XT 8% quicker, but the 4070 Super was 42% faster than the 3070. 4040p ultra-wide then, 83.1 frames per second average. Here the 7800 XT is 11% quicker than the 4070 Super, but the 4070 Super is 39% faster than the RTX 3070. At 4K we did a 58.4 frames per second average, and that made the 7800 XT 11% faster, but the 4070 Super was 48% faster than the RTX 3070. House Flipper 2 is next. This game uses the Unity engine, and here at 4040p we did 114.8 frames per second on average. That was 8% faster than the 7800 XT and 26% ahead of the RTX 3070. 4040p ultra-wide, 93.3 frames per second on average, 10% ahead of the 7800 XT and 30% ahead of the RTX 3070. At 4K we did 58.2 frames per second average, and that was only 3% faster than the 7800 XT and 16.4% faster than the RTX 3070. Elder Scrolls Online is up next. This game uses a custom version of the Hero engine, apparently. At 4040p we did 213.4 frames per second average, and that made it 9% faster than the 7800 XT and 44% faster than the RTX 3070. At 4040p ultra-wide we are coming in at 162.0 frames per second average, which made it 7% faster than the 7800 XT and 40% faster than the RTX 3070. At 4K we are doing 106.7 frames per second average, 2% faster than the 7800 XT and 30% faster than the 3070. Dead Space is next. This game uses the Frostbite engine. I would use Battlefield 2042, but that game doesn't support overlays anymore, so I did not. 4040p, 97.3 frames per second on average, 4% ahead of the 7800 XT and 51% ahead of the RTX 3070. 3440x4040, here we did 73.3 frames per second on average, that was on par with the 7800 XT and 45% ahead of the RTX 3070. At 4K we're down to 44.8 frames per second on average. Here the 7800 XT is an unusual 28% ahead, but the 4070 Super is 94% ahead of the 3070, possibly because of the VRAM, not quite sure. Doom Eternal, id Tech Engine 7, 4040p, 332.7 frames per second on average, 3% ahead of the 7800 XT and 48% ahead of the 3070. 3440x4040, 259.4 frames per second average, 4% ahead of the 7800 XT and about twice as fast as the 3070. 4K, 165.3 frames per second average, that was on par with the 7800 XT, but more than twice as quick as the 3070. Forza Motorsport is next. This game uses the Forza Tech engine. At 1440p we are coming in at 108.2 frames per second average, 2% ahead of the 7800 XT and 41% ahead of the 3070. 4040p ultra-wide, 3% ahead of the 7800 XT and 56% ahead of the 3070. At 4K, the 7800 XT and 4070 Super is basically performing identical, and the 3070 is, or both are 70% ahead of the RTX 3070. And that wraps up the Raster benchmarks. Now we move on to the ray tracing titles. Tokyo is the first game in our ray tracing suite. This game uses the Unreal Engine 4. At 1440p we are coming in at 99.5 frames per second average, which made it 21% faster than the 7800 XT and 37% ahead of the RTX 3070. 1440p ultra-wide, 79.7 frames per second on average, 26% ahead of the 7800 XT and 45% ahead of the 3070. 4K we're down to 47.5 frames per second on average, 24% ahead of the 7800 XT and 52% ahead of the 3070. Next up is Dead Space. This game uses the Frostbite engine, and here we are using ray tracing ambient occlusion. This is a fairly light ray tracing load. 4040p, 85.5 frames per second average, 7% ahead of the 7800 XT and 50% ahead of the 3070. 3440 by 1440, 66.3 frames per second average, 3% ahead of the 7800 XT and 51% ahead of the 3070. 4K then, 40.6 frames per second average. Here the 7800 XT is 4% faster, but the 4070 Super is more than 2 times faster than the 3070. Cyberpunk 2077, this game uses the Red Engine 4. 4040p, 81.5 frames per second on average, 44% ahead of the 7800 XT and 63% ahead of the 3070. 4040p ultra-wide, 67.4 frames per second average, again 44% faster than the 7800 XT and 54% ahead of the 3070. At 4K we're down to 42.2 frames per second average, but here we are still 36% ahead of the 7800 XT and 82% ahead of the 3070. So Cyberpunk with heavy ray tracing really performs a lot better on the Nvidia cards compared to AMD. Control using the Northlight engine, 1440p, 74.8 frames per second on average, 21% ahead of the 7800 XT and 41% ahead of the 3070. 4040p ultra-wide, 58.2 frames per second on average, 21% ahead of the 7800 XT, 40% ahead of the 3070. 4K, 36 frames per second on average, 21% ahead of the 7800 XT again, and over 3 times faster than the 3070. F123 is next. This game uses the Ego Engine 4. At 1440p we are doing 86.1 frames per second on average, 27% ahead of the 7800 XT and 41% ahead of the 3070. At 1440p ultra-wide we are doing 68.2 frames per second on average, 24% ahead of the 7800 XT and 43% ahead of the RTX 3070. At 4K we're doing 43.7 frames per second on average, 30% faster than the 7800 XT and 41% ahead of the 3070. Next up is the finals using Unreal Engine 5. 1440p, 128.4 frames per second average, 9% faster than the 7800 XT and 36% ahead of the 3070. 1440p ultra-wide, 100.1 frames per second average, that was 2% ahead of the 7800 XT and 35% ahead of the 3070. 4K, 59.8 frames per second average, 3% faster than the 7800 XT and 29% ahead of the 3070. Doom Eternal then, using id Tech Engine 7 with ray tracing on, 1440p, 213 frames per second, 39% ahead of the 7800 XT and close to 3 times faster than the 3070. 3440 by 1440, 166.9 frames per second on average, 36% ahead of the 7800 XT, and again, well, actually now it's over 3 times faster than the 3070. 4K, 107.1 frames per second on average, 27% ahead of the 7800 XT, and just under 3 times faster than the 3070. Last ray tracing title now, Forza Motorsport using the Forza Tech engine, 1440p, 88.2 frames per second average, 8% ahead of the 7800 XT and 58% ahead of the 3070. 1440p ultra-wide, 81.8 frames per second average, 11% ahead of the 7800 XT and 71% ahead of the 3070. 4K then, now we're down to 5% ahead of the 7000 XT, but we are over twice as fast as the 3070, and that wraps up our ray tracing benchmarks. So on average then, with ray tracing on, the 4070 Super is 22% ahead of the 7000 XT at 1440p. It's also over twice as fast as the 2070 Super S ray tracing, and 70% faster than the 3070, and that's no doubt helped by the extra 4 gigs of VRAM. But this is at 1440p. At 1440p ultra-wide, it's 19% faster than the 7000 XT, and again, over twice as fast as the 2070 Super. The 4070 Super is 69% faster than the 3070 at 1440p ultra-wide. At 4K then, the 4070 Super is down to 16% ahead of the 7000 XT, still a decent margin, much faster than the 2070 Super, and close to twice as quick as the 3070. Now for average raster performance, the 4070 Super is 5% ahead of the 7000 XT at 1440p. It's 42% faster than the 3070 and 96% ahead of the 2070 Super. At 1440p ultra-wide, the 4070 Super is down to 4% ahead of the 7000 XT. It's 53% faster than the 3070 and 95% ahead of the 2070 Super. At 4K, the 7000 XT takes a technical victory with a bit over 1 FPS compared to the 4070 Super, but they are essentially on par with each other at 4K. The 4070 Super is 53% ahead of the 3070 and over 2 times quicker than the 2070 Super. Now, of course, the thing to keep in mind here is that the 7800 XT we tested is the Phantom gaming model, which has a 5.55% overclock, higher boost clock than the stock model. And this 40 Super, even though it's also an overclocked model, it's like a 1% higher core clock compared to the stock model. So, we do need to touch on overclocking and power consumption. Starting with power consumption. Using the TimeSpy Extreme stress test, the total system power draw from the wall was 336 watts. So that's pretty efficient. And if we take the power draw, divide that by the FPS, we find that it used 5.5 watts per FPS, the entire system that is. And that's quite a bit more efficient than the other cards in this roundup. So the RX 6800, RX 7800 XT, RTX 2070 Super, and RTX 3070. None of them are touching this card in efficiency. Another thing to note about this card when it comes to overclocking is that the power limiter is locked at 100%. Well, not locked. You can set it lower, but you can't exceed 100%. And that means your overclocking headroom is going to be very limited on this model. You can still overclock the memory and you can overclock the core a bit, but don't expect a large result. I think I got like a 3 to 5% uplift when overclocking on this model. And that's compared to the 7800 XT, which got an uplift of about 10 to 15% when overclocking. So this particular 4070 Super model is not a good overclocker, but overclocking really throws the efficiency out the window, and it will of course also vary depending from card to card, silicon quality and all that. So yeah, I still wouldn't spend a lot of money on a model that you can overclock, because you will probably not get a return on that money in terms of performance. Even if you do overclock, it's not going to be a lot faster than a stock card. So what then do I think of the 4070 Super? I think it's a good card, and I think if you are on a 5700 XT, 2070 Super, RTX 3060, or RX 6600 XT, or any of those types of cards, because all those cards that I just mentioned, they perform about the same. And I do think this is a good upgrade from those cards. You do get almost twice the performance of a 2070 Super, and that also goes for the 7000 XT. But this card also brings a lot more ray tracing performance. So it's about 20% quicker on average compared to the 7800 XT. And it's a lot faster than this 2070 Super and RX 6600 XT, for instance. The ray tracing performance on that card is pretty poor. So this will be a massive upgrade from that. Even the 7800 XT would be a massive upgrade from that. I do think this card is worth a bit more. I mean, the rest of the performance is about the same as the 7800 XT. It's a bit faster, 5% faster, but it costs $100 more. But in addition to that, you do get access to DLSS, which is better than FSR. It has better image quality compared to FSR. So DLSS has better image quality compared to FSR, and that is worth something. You also get the frame gen on the 4070 Super. So frame generation, I did try it in Cyberpunk. it's okay. I don't think it's a game changer, because you do want the base FPS to be quite high in order to not get a large impact on your input latency. Because if you have like 20 frames per second and you activate frame gen, it's going to still feel pretty terrible. So you do need a good baseline performance, and yeah, sure, the image is a bit smoother. Same thing, I did also try the AF MF stuff on the 7800 XT. Basically the same experience. It's not as good as DLSS 3, of course, but yeah, there also you do want a fairly high baseline performance before activating it to not get a ton of input latency. So in my opinion, nothing beats just pure performance, you know, none of this fakery, upscaling, frame gen, all that. Just give me the most amount of GPU performance you can. I take that over any of these technologies, but they're nice to have, I guess. Yeah, DLSS is of course worth something, so that's good, and you do get a step above the 7800 XT in terms of ray tracing. I mean, it's like a generation above the 7800 XT, which it also is, because this is third gen RT stuff, and the 7800 XT is second gen for AMD, so that makes sense. Yeah, so basically, because of the DLSS and ray tracing performance, yes, this card is worth more than the 7800 XT. It has 4 gigs less VRAM. I don't think you'll run into a lot of situations where that will be a problem, at least not now. And when it does become a problem, maybe the card is not really strong enough anyway, I don't know. But yeah, 12 gigs is okay, but of course at $600 you should get 16. That is my honest opinion. So this card should probably be like $500, 7800 XT, $400, or even lower. I mean, the GPU prices have gotten a bit away from us, I think. They are a lot more expensive now, it feels like, at least compared to in the past. But yeah, and the gen-on-gen increases, they're not really that big. I mean, 7800 XT, 6800 XT, basically the same. And 3060 Ti, 4060 Ti, not really a big difference there either. 3060 to 4060, not a big difference there either. So, I mean, the biggest difference between the 3060 and 4060 is the VRAM. 3060 has 4 gigs more. Yeah, so that's another way to look at it. The 4070 Super has the same amount of VRAM as the 3060, but it's a lot more performance, of course. So yeah, I do recommend the 4070 Super, but do try to keep it close to MSRP. Don't buy any of these overpriced Strix or Oris Master or Gaming X's or Strix, or yeah, I mentioned Strix twice, but the point stands. Don't spend a lot more on those models, because you can almost, here anyway, you can get an MSRP 4070 Ti Super for the same price as a 4070 Super Strix. Or you can get a 7900 XT, and the 7900 XT, I would personally pick that over the 4070 Super. I mean, you get 8 gigs more VRAM, better raster performance. Ray tracing is probably not as good, but should still be plenty usable. I mean, the 7800 XT is also usable in ray tracing, but it's not as good as this one. So yeah, recommended 4070 Super, but if you are looking for 4070 Super, this is the order in which you should purchase them if you care about noise and temperatures and stuff. First, Asus Dual. That's the best MSRP model based on what I've seen online. I haven't tested it myself, but there's art tests online you can take a look at. It looks to be the best MSRP model. Founders Edition is the next one, and then this thing, MSI Ventus 2X, that's third in line, because it's not, the temperature is not as low and the noise is not as low as the Asus Dual or the Founders Edition, I think. But it is better for small form factor cases because of the small form factor. And then after that comes the Gigabyte models. They're okay, but they're not great based on previous experiences. I haven't really tested anything this gen, but yeah. I mean, if you are going for Gigabyte, I think the Gaming OC lineup is the lowest I would go. Those should be okay, at least based on past experiences, but the lower end models, Windforce and stuff, might not be that great. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. So, if you're looking for a 4070 Super that fits into tight spaces, the MSI Ventus 2X might be your best bet. If not, take a look at the Asus Dual and the Founders Edition. That's it. Goodbye.